Oh, there you go. Diane, the floor is yours.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being with us. The first book of 2021-2022 will be A Seat at the Table, our next review, on Thursday, September 23rd at 7 p.m. Dr. Ed Septimus will be the reviewer. Thank you, Ed, for your excellent reviews. We are so fortunate to have you as a reviewer. Copies of the book are available for borrowing. They are in the Sisterhood office with the sign-up sheet. Hours are 10 to 2, Wednesday and Thursday. As of August 1st, the Sisterhood office will be open Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And you don't need any kind of reservation or telephone call. Just go right into the Sisterhood office and the books will be there. Susan, on behalf of Sisterhood, there aren't enough thanks for your dedication and devotion to make book reviews such an outstanding Sisterhood program. We greatly appreciate all that you have contributed to make Sisterhood book reviews such a great success. It is a labor of love for you, I know that, and we all thank you so much. And now if you'll introduce Ed.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to say it's been my pleasure. It really has been a labor of love. And now I'm handing over the reins to someone that I know will do a fantastic job, that Diane Pichette. Before I introduce Ed, probably all of you know him, but I wanted to dedicate this book review in memory of Beatty Lewis. Beatty passed away on July the 2nd of this year at 104 years old. She was at every single book review and she had read every single book, including the one that Ed will review this evening. She was so inspirational. She would then discuss each book, I know, with Barbara Kalmans or with other friends. So I hope that you keep her in your thoughts. We will miss her at all the coming book reviews, but we all have wonderful, wonderful memories of Beatty. So now I'd like to introduce Ed, my husband, who will be reviewing tonight's selection, Becoming Eve. I think he's really, really enjoyed preparing for this. And I think he's got a lot of interesting information for you and for us. And without further ado, Edward.
Well, thank you, Susan. It's really a double honor tonight to present another book review to our community, and the second to dedicate this book review in memory of Beatty Lewis. I remember Beatty very well. She came to all of my book reviews, which, that's quite an accomplishment. But what I really remember about her, number one, she always came prepared, and number two, I remember her infectious smile. I know we're all going to miss her greatly. And it's my honor to do this in her memory. So with that, let's go to the next slide. As my wife said, the name of the book is Becoming Eve, My Journey from Ultra-Orthodox Rabbi to Transgender Woman. And as you can see, this is Abby when she was a male, and this is after her transition. Abby Stein was born as Yisrael Avram Ben Menachem Mendel in 1991. In Brooklyn, New York. She's one of 13 children. As you know, all of these folks have lots of children. She was the first male. She has 5 older sisters. And the book was really written to share. And I'm going to be mixing my comments with reading from the book. And then towards the end, we'll be showing you a video interview with Abby. But she really wanted to share the beautiful parts of her childhood, the feelings of safety, belonging, and love that growing up in a religious, even cultish community can offer, hand in hand, though, with the trauma of the discomfort with my body and gender in a gender segregated society. It was a childhood that helped me figure out who I am. My story is my own, but it's also something greater. It is also a simple story of a girl coming of age, shedding of one's identity and growing into another. And she emphasizes no agenda to my story. So if we can go to the next slide. Go to the next slide. Okay. This is actually an important slide, and you'll see how it all fits together. At the beginning of the book, she has this dedication: to my son, the love of my life, David, to long years, mighty waters cannot quench love, rivers cannot sweep it away. And many of you remember this is from Songs of Songs. So if we can go to the next slide. Abby was raised as a Hasidic Jew in Williamsburg, New York. Many of you know that's an ultra-religious community, along with Muncie, probably the most well-known communities in the Hasidic community. And it was a direct descendant of the Polish healer, Israel ben Eliezer, which you can see here. It was the Baal Shem Tov, and was regarded as the founder of Hasidic Judaism, which is a subset of Orthodox Judaism. Hasidism is known for its insular community that emulate Eastern Europe Jewish schettles, not only in style and dress and cuisine, but also the strictness of their Judaic practices. And as the slide indicates, Baal Shem Tov means master of a good name or one of a good reputation. And the central tenet of the Baal Shem Tov teaching is a direct connection with the divine, which is infused literally in every human activity and every waking hour. That's my dog doing her blitz back here. Prayer is of supreme importance to this particular community, along with the mystical significance of Hebrew letters and words. So if we can go to the slide off now. Abby Stein grew up with almost no access to modern culture or English language. Boys like Israel, descended from a line of revered rabbis, were expected to become rabbis and leaders themselves. They exclusively, if you know, spoke only Hebrew and Yiddish and received very little, if any, education in secular subjects, and spent the majority of their time exclusively studying Torah and Talmud. So I want to give you a sense of what their day was like. We're starting off with more of the elementary school. So at age 5, this is what happens. The bus picks them up at around 8:15 in the morning. And by 8:13, they were in the school dining room eating breakfast. Now, by 9:15, they assembled for morning prayers, which was followed by 5 minutes of reciting Psalms and another 15 minutes of studying morality. This is at age 5. Then they came to the morning study period, in which they was filled with Torah study, and they'd learn texts and lessons from the weekly portion of the Bible or the parashah. Now, they gave them a short recess from 11:30 to 11:45, and they went back to class until 1 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, they ate lunch, and then they came for the dreaded 45 minutes of playing indoor playgrounds. And you'll see for her, this was not the most favorite time of her time. She did not like playing with other boys. Now at 2 o'clock, they returned to the classroom where they said the afternoon prayers. They came to the second study session of the day, and they were started studying Talmud, which, as you know, is the foundation of rabbinic Judaism. At 4 o'clock, they had a couple of secular studies. It was usually either English or math. And at 5 o'clock, they headed home. Susan, stop doing that. I'm getting bothered. Okay, now, when they got older and they went to the yeshiva, okay, the school day started around 6 o'clock in the morning. They were supposed to be in the study hall with their textbook ready to study. At 8 a.m., they took a short break to prepare for morning prayers. They grabbed a second and sometimes even third cup of coffee, and coffee becomes important a little bit later in the story. And most yeshivas provided free coffee all day. And then they could use the bathroom, because that was important, because they wanted to make sure their bodies were clean before they put on tefillin. At 8:15, they prayed. The morning liturgy was the longest and most important set of prayers. And then after the morning prayer, they had 45 minutes or so to eat breakfast. Most days they were served a very nice continental breakfast. And after breakfast, they came to the morning study session, which lasted now until 2 p.m. The study section was devoted to Talmud and used the concept of deep study session. Anyone who's ever been to a yeshiva knows what that means. And then at 2 o'clock, they had an hour for lunch. And the afternoon started at 3 o'clock. And in that session, they studied 16th-century Jewish law. And at some point in the middle of the afternoon, they had time for afternoon prayers. Then they started studying again at 6:15. At 6:15, they had a 15-minute break. They could go to the dining hall. They could eat cookies. And guess what? They could drink more coffee. Wow. I guess they didn't have a Starbucks, though, at this yeshiva. And then the evening session was from 6:30 to 7:45. And guess what? They were able to go home and eat dinner. And then they went to bed. Now, I was reading this and I said, you know what? That was worse than my residency, but that shows you how absolutely incredibly structured and how intense school was for the students, especially the male students. Now, going back in time now, I just wanted to give you a sense of what their study was like. Going back to when she was 3 years old, as many of you know, there's a tradition in Orthodox to their first haircut. And Abby recalls with horror begging to keep those curls because she wanted to feel more like a girl. And she wanted to be more like her sisters. Remember, she had 5 older sisters at the time. But she remembered that this was really a traumatic thing for her. And then at age 4, just an incredible section of the book, she was caught poking pins in her penis while taking a bath. She always wanted to be a girl, and private parts were never discussed in her culture. And that'll become important as we get towards the marriage. And she tried to dress up in her mother's and sister's clothing. And again, this was at age 4. Now, she was an avid reader and obviously extremely bright. She learned to read Yiddish at age 5 when most of the boys learned by age 9. So she was way ahead of her time. And she basically read whatever was made available to her, considering anything other than religious works, of course, were discouraged. She was an avid reader and collected articles about, of all things, transplants. She was told that God can help with anything. And then she thought, well, maybe it was time for her to turn to God. Now, remember, she's now at age 9, and she actually wrote this prayer. And I want you to think how incredibly bright and wonderful this is. Here's the prayer, because she always thought that God could really help with anything. Holy Creator, I am going to sleep now, and I look like a boy. I am begging you, when I wake up in the morning, I want to be a girl. I know that you can do anything, and nothing is too hard for you. So please, I am a girl. Why can't I look like a beautiful girl? She goes on. And if you do that, I promise that I'll be a good girl. I will dress in the most modest clothes. I will listen to everything Mommy and Tati is her father, ask. And I will keep all the commandments girls have to keep in the best way possible. And when I get older, I'll be the best wife. I'll help my husband study Torah all day and all night. I'll cook the best food for him, and my kids, I will have the nicest Shabbos table, and I will have many babies as I can. God, you have enough boys. You don't need for me to be a boy. I promise if I wake up a girl, I will make up for it by having many boys who will be the most studied and pious boys. I want to give birth to girls when I'm older, but if you listen to me now, I am ready to make an exchange. Let me be a girl. I will be happy. I have a big family with just boys. Oh God, help me. This is when she was age 9. Several years later, she's getting close to her bar mitzvah. And once again, she says, you know, I was a girl being raised as a boy, and now I'm going to have a bar mitzvah. And she began to have these nightmares. And with her 13th birthday, of course, came puberty. In addition, as you probably know the tradition, the week before, on Friday night, the week before her bar mitzvah, her father came and told her to go to bed early. We have to wake up early, her father said. You should go to mikveh before morning prayers. You are becoming an adult, so you should do what all men do. As most of you know, the mikveh is a ritual bath for Jews used to purify since the temple in Jerusalem. Now, as most of us thought, while in most religious Jewish communities, the mikveh is used mostly by women to purify themselves each month after their period or after giving birth. In the Hasidic community, it turns out that men actually use it more often than women. And every big Hasidic synagogue has their own mikveh, and the custom is for men to immerse themselves in water every day. And actually, I learned that during the pandemic when I helped advise a couple of our Orthodox communities about how often, in fact, men actually do go to the mikveh. So that was a surprise to me, but certainly brought out in this particular book. Well, fast forward now she's now in yeshiva. And she, as you probably know if you've read the book, she changed yeshivas more than once. Even though she was being groomed to be an esteemed rabbi as the firstborn male in the Stein family, as I mentioned, she didn't like playing with boys, and she got kicked out of her first yeshiva, Satmar, which surprisingly they put her in this. It's an anti-Zionist, not just anti-Israel, but opposed to the ideas of Jews having a state in the land of Israel before the Messiah comes. And the Satmar considered people who supported Israel to be heretics. So my first point of discussion to the audience, and someone can unmute themselves, you know why she was kicked out of Satmar? Anybody want to say why she got kicked out? I tell you, it has to do with coffee. Remember I told you about coffee? Anybody want to take a stab or want to tell me why she got kicked out? I guess people are too shy. Well, I'll tell you anyway.
Drinking too much coffee?
No, not
No,
quite.
Worse than that.
No,
Trying to think of,
that's okay.
she asked a lot of questions.
Yeah, that wasn't it either. That's okay. Let me, and this gets to the coffee.
Did
you know?
you throw a cup of coffee at somebody?
No.
She
But
changed the coffee or
I
something.
thought she put something in the coffee.
Okay,
Yeah.
you're getting closer. So what she did was there were two kinds of coffee you could drink. This would not be my choices, and I love coffee. Nescafe or Taster's Choice. So it must have been instant. And she found when you mix coffee, sugar, in hot water, what happens to it? Anybody remember? My wife knows. You want to say, Susan? Tell them what it is. No, you're muted. You're
Yeah.
muted. What is it?
It turns into a substance that looks and smells like poop.
That's correct. And it really sticks to clothing and people, okay? So what happened is that one of the students, together with a few other students, went into the coffee room, okay, and made this nasty mix. Now, again, this was demonstrated by Abby, but this was carried out by other students. And then they went back to the classroom window, and you could all of a sudden hear these screams of the 9th graders in the study hall. Poop, poop, they screamed, okay? So you can imagine the commotion that caused in the yeshiva. And so with this particular plot, this is great. I love what happened here. they actually called in a master detective. And the master detective turned out to be the rabbi's wife. And everyone was terrified of the rabbi's wife. So an hour goes by after the investigation started, and it became clear that she really wasn't so concerned about the students who actually threw the coffee, but she wanted to know who the mastermind was who plotted it. And as the text goes, she was after the head of the snake. P.S. She was after me, meaning Abby. So Abby gets sent to the principal's office. Any of you ever been sent to the principal's office? I have once. And the rabbi's wife, Miriam, said in a quiet scream, "I was expecting this to be a troublemaker, not you, a child of such a renowned rabbinic family, one of our best students. How could this be?" Abby sort of sat back. She said she should have hung her head, but instead she just stood there waiting for the axe to fall. And then Miriam said, "I'm not going to expel you. Instead, I've worked out a punishment with your father. You have to commit to taking an additional subject of study, something not studied by the other students, and you have to study at lunch every day." Now, I've already told you she's an avid reader. And so inside she says, "I wanted to burst out laughing. This was my punishment? An excuse to read during lunchtime?" So this was not the punishment I think that they had expected. So what happened the rest of the semester? The rest of the semester, her behavior kind of waxed and waned. Some days she was really a good student. She studied and prayed. And other days she claimed that she was sick. She avoided going to school. She hated going to school. And then there were days where, in fact, she did act out, either in a low-key bad behavior or sometimes more around religious disagreements with her teachers, which is what somebody said. And then it reached the boiling point, okay? So one morning, again, a mystery student mixed this wonderful coffee, sugary poop recipe, and it got it on the rabbi. And I don't know who it is or how, but the rabbi was convinced that it was Abby. So actually falsely accused, but as you can tell, she was blamed and she was expelled. The next yeshiva she went to, also in Brooklyn, okay, was a more pluralistic yeshiva. And Stein, who was an avid reader, began to study Levi ben Gershon. So does anybody know who Gershon was? Silent. I didn't know who it was either. So David, why don't we put up the next slide? So these are the Gershonites. I say he was a rabbi in medieval France, a Jewish philosopher, Talmudist, mathematician, physician, astronomer. He was known for his unorthodox views. He was a rigid Aristotelian. And he eventually led him to rationalize many of the miracles in the Bible. His commentary on the Bible was sharply criticized by the most prominent scholars of his time. He certainly was, in contrast to Maimonides. Now, in contrast to the theologies held by other Jewish thinkers, Gershon held that God doesn't have to have complete foreknowledge of human acts. That, get this, God was not omnipotent. And Gershon was bothered by the old question of how God's foreknowledge is compatible with human freedom, and holds that what God knows beforehand is all the choices open to each individual, but God doesn't know ahead of time what choice the individual in his freedom will make. And as many of you know from Genesis, one of the things that God was given to man was free choice. He believed miracles did not exist in our day-to-day lives, and that God, who created the world, rarely intervened in our daily lives. So this was a dramatic change from what was being taught, certainly in the Hasidic community. And so while he was studying Gershon, he or she described it, her brain sort of froze. She said, hold on, okay? And he said, my entire life was led to believe that there's only one Torah, one God, and one way to interpret God's world. But here's a Jewish scholar who says it's not true, and that what I've been told my entire life is wrong. This was pretty eye-opening for her. Someone who believes every story about miracles performed by the Baal Shem Tov and other Hasidic Rebbes, he thinks was foolish. But someone who does not believe all the stories are heretics. You have to believe that they could do it, goes the Hasidic saying. At that point, she lost her blind faith. And when she realized that the same people who swore that I was a boy also preached blind faith, faith was beautiful for those who possess it, but I lost it at age 12 and never got back to it. Believing in the divinity of our masters is what kept me going. And he said one thing for sure, I was done listening to anyone who told me that I had to believe in what I could and could not think. And I didn't stop there. One book led to another. Remember, she's an avid reader. And more than that, eventually she came upon two books that became her favorites. Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion and Richard Elliott Friedman's Who Wrote the Bible. Now remember, she's not been taught English. She couldn't read English, so she read them in Hebrew translations, and she finished the books in 1 week. It would now be close to impossible, she said, for her to go back and believe in a system that refused to indulge in all my questions. Finally, this is a tremendous revelation to her. Finally, I thought, I now know what's bothering me. Now, you might say it's because she felt she was a girl. What she realizes this, it's not her gender, but it's her religion. And it was getting harder and harder to stay in yeshiva as a non-believer. Well, you probably know what happened next. So she goes to this other yeshiva in Brooklyn. And once again, some other student causes a commotion, and Stein is again falsely accused. Both times she gets kicked out of yeshiva for things that she actually didn't do, but she clearly was a trailblazer and certainly was challenging to her rabbis. So the next yeshiva she goes to, this is because she unfortunately had been banished from all the local Brooklyn yeshivas. She now goes up to, guess where, Muncie, New York, in the Catskill Mountains, Gibber's Yeshiva. And this was a very important time of her life. Okay, she thought that perhaps if she conformed, and you'll see how she goes back and forth with some of her feelings. She now thought, well, maybe if I conform to this new yeshiva, all my crazy thoughts about being a girl would go away. She said, if the Rebbe says that this was best for me, it must be, even though she said all those things I told you before, she's now trying to say, well, maybe I could do better. Maybe being around only boys for a while will show me how to be a real boy. So one thing that occurred to me as I was reading this, we keep hearing these terms, Rebbe and Rabbi. So who can kind of tell me what they think the difference is between a Rebbe and a Rabbi?
A Rebbe is kind of the leader of a faith community that is larger than one synagogue or one shul or one yeshiva, and a rabbi is more focused on one section of that community.
That's correct. The Rebbe is the Hasidic supreme leader. And by the way, the Rebbe actually was in Muncie, New York, where she went the third time. So the ultra-Orthodox relationships, as you probably all know, between physical sex and marriage is really described very nicely in the book. And as a young boy, Yisrael, of course, is Abby, is taught, as you know, especially that incident when he was 4 years old, to never touch himself. And he would only be told about the act of sex by a marriage coach. And there's a wonderful section in the book about this marriage coach the day before the wedding. Yisrael discovered things along the way as she reads and even experiments with a homosexual relationship with a boy she met at this yeshiva called Chesky. There during, and again, remember I told you how rigorous their study was when they were doing Talmudic and Jewish law studies, lasting 20 hours a day. Stein, befriended by this boy Chesky, another male student, she actually developed a crush on him. Both found ways to escape the campus for their first awkward sexual encounters to let off steam from so much studying. And I want to read some of this because I think some of the stuff I believe is really beautiful. So they start taking these long walks together, mostly at nights. And Chesky and Abby began to have these growing feelings for each other. I knew I felt something indifferent about him, but it took me a few weeks to understand the nature of those feelings. Then it hit me. One day I was studying about the illicit affair between King David and Bathsheba in the book of Samuel, when it suddenly dawned on me that what I really wanted to do with Chesky was the same thing that married people did. At that time, I hadn't known that there could be such an attraction between two people of the same sex. I only knew that a man and a woman got married and had a form of sexual relationships. I also had no awareness of same-sex attraction. But of course, I was a girl, so it made sense to me that I would be physically attracted to a boy. And my fondness for Chesky somehow seemed like further proof that in fact I am a girl, because only a girl would want a boy, right? And as time passed, our nightly walks became longer and our conversations more intense. We never talked about our feelings, but it was clear to me that they were shared. We would intentionally bump into each other as we walked. You have to understand, this is in a yeshiva in the Hasidic community. They put our arms around each other, something considered taboo in the yeshiva. We even allowed ourselves tight hugs when we parted. And after we went our separate rooms, my imagination would light up, thinking of all ways I wanted to be a woman to him. She said, Chesky, I said, breaking the silence, you make me feel special. I feel as though my soul is connected with yours. And he responded, you know, I feel the same way. I stood up and kissed him on the cheek. You have to understand how remarkable this is. And of course, Chesky turned red. And Abby said, is there something wrong? And Chesky says, no, I liked it. We looked at each other's eyes for a brief moment and we both started blushing. I could feel an intensity building up in my body, a kind of heat that I'd never felt before. We smiled at each other and looked down at the grass. It was intense for both of us and we needed a break. And then we checked the time. It was almost 2 o'clock. It was time for lunch and we were expected to be back in the dining room. And so it's getting late and we better go. The next few days, we avoided each other. Obviously, this was a very intense moment for both of them. And by the next Saturday afternoon, on the way to my room after lunch, we again ran into each other. Chesky, I want to talk with you, I said. This is Abby. My voice suddenly loud and tight. Sure. Chesky said, let's go for a walk. So we walked. I know what we are doing is not allowed, I told him, but it feels right. I don't believe that sin can feel this good. Part of me didn't believe my own words, but I wanted Chesky to believe him. And I don't know if he truly believed them either, but a few days later, we headed down to the lake again. There were a few boats in the water and we took one of them and paddled to the middle of the lake. That's where I kissed Chesky again. This time, he kissed me back. As his soft, strong lips touched my cheeks, I felt an electric pulse run through my body, awakening every nerve. I kissed him back on the cheeks, and he kissed me again. Then he said, how do you think it would feel if our lips came together? Well, there's only one way, it is to try. They locked lips. They put their arms around their shoulders. They continued kissing, holding each other and pressing their bodies together. This feels so good, he said. But we have to make sure that nobody knows about this. These are very personal moments. Well, the next 2 months, they continue to go on these walks and go down to the lake and sneaking out. And their feelings vacillated between deep love and terrible guilt because, you know, they felt so good that they knew that it must be forbidden. Then they started to go swimming, and this is just a beautiful piece. They turned to each other, their hands interlocked, their chests were naked. They started to cuddle. And as it was, I felt more comfortable with him at any moment than I ever felt before. Yes, but something, I dare to say, I think I am a girl. He laughed it off. Ha ha, you just do girlish things. We both knew what we were doing was wrong, but we couldn't face it. We couldn't face it. As we lay together, we pretended to be half asleep. And as we rubbed ourselves against each other, other turns being on top and on the bottom, our swimsuits were sliding down. He was on top of me. We both moaned, and soon we were both fully naked, and our genitals touched, and we both gasped. I mean, it's just so beautifully written in this passage. So Stein began to take a deep dive into Kabbalistic studies, and early on Friday morning, she came upon a very important chapter, chapter 9. This chapter focused on gender of souls and how different souls may enter different bodies throughout time. It reads, at times a male will be reincarnated in the body of a female, and a female will be a male body. The words jumped from the page in front of me. I froze. I read it again and again. And for the first time after 16 years, I found a text that justified my existence. Maybe I wasn't crazy after all. Stood up on my chair, left the study hall, walked out in the cold air into the forest, and cried like a baby. Now comes the marriage. And as you know, by the time a yeshiva boy becomes 18, a marriage is recommended and arranged by matchmakers. Stein looked forward to the marriage, but she was genuinely wanted to be the bride, not the groom. She briefly met her fiance. Eye contact, by the way, was not allowed. And she did not have another option to meet her. And guess what? Until their wedding 1 year later. As the wedding approached, she could not stop about how she could be a bride. Her name was Frady. I like Frady, but she could not help feeling that she deserved to marry a, quote, a real man. Well, the day before the wedding, there was a real snowstorm, and the name of the chapter here is called A Wedding in the Blizzard. So I want to read a few things about the wedding, but I think, again, it's also beautifully written. So they had their wedding in Williamsburg, and they were actually going to live in Muncie. So, Frady said, when we were walking into the hall for dancing after the wedding, I had no idea that we could hold my hand in public. My family doesn't do that. Abby said, really? I'm surprised. Everyone in my family does. The only time a couple ever holds hands in public is between the ceremony and the celebrations. Yes, my family holds hands, but only on the way out of the ceremony, just not on the way to the dancing. And Abby says, did you mind at all that we did? I had no idea that your family doesn't. Oh, no, not at all, Frady laughed. I liked it. It felt nice. And again, you can see where she vacillates back and forth. Something crept into my mind. My wife cares about feelings, maybe even more than she cares about every small detail of strict family customs. This is a good sign that we'll get along and that maybe we'll like each other. It really was a happy thought. Well, after the ceremony, they get driven up to Muncie. They're finally in their new apartment. And as they're entering, as we went, I had a feeling that I could not describe. My stomach was full of butterflies. I felt happiness, a kind of peace and safety I had never experienced before. And again, remarkably, she said, I had a feeling of love that I actually love my wife. And it was just a beautiful statement. Well, the wedding night was successful. I guess the coach was a good coach. And after 4 months of marriage, guess what? Freddie becomes pregnant with their son, David. Stein, of course, if you know the tradition, was not permitted to be with her wife after the first sign of blood. It renders the couple off limits. Abby took a bus home, went to the claiming mikveh, and then came back to the hospital after being called that the baby may be in trouble. So this was an important thing. The doctor said, I'm having a bit of trouble picking up the baby's heart rate. And Abby was terrified. A tear actually came down her cheeks. The doctor said it was almost certainly everything was okay, she continued. This happens from time to time, but he thinks a cesarean section might be a good option. We need to decide. Abby goes on, a cesarean section wasn't what we wanted. We knew that the recovery could be more complicated, and given that this was their first child and it was a boy, it was also meant missing out on a particular celebration that the baby has on their 30th day of life. The Bible requires every firstborn son who is not born of a priestly family needs to be redeemed on that day. And he marked that occasion with a beautiful ceremony. And in fact, we did this for our oldest son. It cost me $5 silver. But that only happens if the baby is born naturally. I didn't know this. And then if the child came to the world any other way than the birth canal, the obligation to redeem and celebrate is null. Okay, I told Freddie's mother, I'll call, who do they call? The Rebbe, and ask him what he should do. And the Rebbe said it was okay. So the son was born by a cesarean section. And this is, again, another beautiful section about the first encounter with the baby. A few minutes later, a nurse came out to say Freddie was all covered up and I could go into the room. Inside, Freddie was smiling like I had never seen her smile before. She was holding a bundle in her arms. I walked closer. My eyes were tearing up. I said, how are you feeling? Well, I felt better, she said, but I have never been happier. You should hold him. Now get how he gets the baby. The baby's handled to a female nurse who then handles it to a male nurse who then hands it to him. Everything around him just disappeared. The nurses were bustling around the room. Visitors were coming in and out. Freddie's sister called. And for him or her, all was fading away. I gazed at the baby in my arms and felt a kind of love I've never felt before. I have not felt since. It was though, and I want you to listen to these words, it was as though I were holding a part of myself. I must say, I thought that was just a beautiful, beautiful section. Now, if you know the story, what happened next? What actually drove Abby off the deep end? Anybody remember? All right, Susan. You're on mute. You're still on mute.
Mute.
There you go.
Okay, circumcision.
That's correct. And so at the circumcision, he stood next to the Rebbe. Remember, the Grand Rebbe was up in Muncie, naming my newborn son. All came crashing down on me. It was the moment as I was naming my newborn boy that I felt my world collapsing. My 20 years of struggling with my gender identity clashed with my first son's first gendered milestone. My struggles with religion clashed with my physical parts of our religion's way of life. The physical cut in the name of God in observance of the second commandment in the Bible, namely literally for our bond with the Jewish and biblical God, it pushed him over the edge. Now, what was she going to do? So I won't really drag us on because I want to make sure we keep in time. one of the things that was very much discouraged in the Hasidic community was access to the internet. Now, here's something that I did not know. Did you know that a device like that could be made kosher? This was startling, okay? So she knew that there were wireless connections to a network, and she was told that every digital device that had internet capabilities must be brought into a special community organization to block certain signals to, quote, make it kosher. I thought this was remarkable. So Abby, being the rebel that she is, she found a friend of hers who had a tablet. And her friend was a little bit rebellious also. So the friend didn't bother to have the kosher filters put on the tablet. So she went to a local strip mall to find an internet connection. Do you all remember this? It was really fascinating. And she spent days in the mall bathroom. And remember, she didn't know English yet, but she found a transgender forum, okay, that opened up the worlds and learned from her experience that there actually was a name for what she was experiencing. It was called gender dysphoria. Next, we go to Yom Kippur, the holiest days of the year. Now Stein is really rebelling. She violated 2 laws. First of all, she ate pork, which wasn't kosher. And then she found this very important site called Footsteps. So if you'll put on the next slide, David. Many of you may have heard this, but Footsteps was founded in 2003, and it was basically designed to help people leave this insular, ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. And this has helped many, many people leave the Jewish, and Footsteps was really so very important for her. So she goes somewhat the Orthodox, she went off the rails, so to speak, and she's now derech, which means off the path. She actually becomes an atheist and she leaves her community. And then at age 24, she makes her transition. Her family unfortunately terminates her contact, but she makes hundreds of friends and on social media and offers her support. And then she finds a new rabbi and mentor. And if we go to the next slide, Rabbi David Inger, the founder and spiritual founder of Romanu, which is a synagogue that actually celebrated individuality. It's welcoming, it's experimental, it's intergenerational. It elevates and transforms individuals and communities into more compassionate human beings. And so this community welcomes her. In fact, there's a video clip showing her being introduced to her community at his synagogue. But this founder was able to integrate meditative mindfulness and physical awareness into mainstream postmodern Judaism, was really helpful for her. So with that, I want to show you a short video of an interview with Abby, which I think will hopefully tie everything together that I've tried to highlight. So go for it. Let's see the video.
I think a lot about my past life as having been almost like I was acting. Was I living a double life?
Growing up, Abby Stein struggled with her identity inside an ultra-Orthodox Jewish community.
I think I was a happy child, specifically until I got older and I started realizing that I don't get along and I can't really make friends with boys and I don't enjoy most of the sports and the things they play.
That's because Abby says she was really a girl born inside a boy's body.
There were times that I tried to tell myself, you are simply wrong and it's impossible what you're feeling.
As she grew up, she followed in the footsteps of her ancestors, becoming a rabbi and getting married.
For me personally, there was a lot of expectations because of my family, which in the Hasidic community has been ruled for the past like 150 years or so by these royal rabbinic families that kind of all marry each other. And for me, that meant being a descendant obviously was a big deal.
That pressure finally came to a boiling point in 2011 when she got life-altering news.
I got the news that we are expecting my son. And for me, that final punchline of, I am so much struggling with who I am.
4 years later, Abby says she made the decision to finally live her truth as a transgender woman.
At the end of the day, I am who I am today, of which I'm very proud and happy and comfortable because of the sum total of my experiences, and I think that is very powerful.
Abby Stein's memoir is Becoming Eve, my journey from Ultra-Orthodox Rabbi to Transgender Woman, and she's here this morning with us. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So take me back to a moment. It was a powerful moment in the book. I think you were 20 years old. You lived your whole life, you say, in this sheltered environment as a man, and you couldn't ignore this feeling anymore. So I think you took a friend's tablet.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That was literally a few days after my son was born. And I had a friend who had a tablet that I don't know if it was ever connected to the internet, because the internet is the worst thing you can do in the community. I took it, went to a public mall that I actually visited yesterday for the first time again.
Wow.
And found a bathroom. It was a unisex bathroom that had a public Wi-Fi connection. And it was the first time I went online.
And what did you search?
The first thing that I searched was whether a boy could turn into a girl in Hebrew, didn't speak English at all. And that led me to the Hebrew Wikipedia page that was talking about transgender, and it was the first time that I heard that term. I identified as such without having words for it since I remember myself. And then from there, I was led to forums, online forums, mostly in Hebrew. And then
when did you do that? Did you just whisk away to search? And
I spent a lot of hours in that bathroom, which was, yeah.
Wow.
And later on, I sneaked in a cell phone, which is the part of the internet. As much as the community is trying to ban it, you can't. If someone wants internet, they're going to have internet, which is what happened with me.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you write the circumcision of your son was kind of this.
Yeah.
This moment, you felt your world kind of collapse in on you.
I felt like gender is punching me in the face, to put it quite literal, because it was also, even leading up to that, we all gender babies before they're conceived, I say. Like, everyone is like, are you going to do a pink or blue nursery because it really matters, and stuff like that. And that happened even in my community. And the circumcision was like the final punchline. It was like, here's someone that I am supposed to raise as a boy. I have no idea what's going on with me other than how I identify. It could be genetic. What if my son is feeling the same thing? And how could I bring someone and raise someone in the world if I don't know who I am?
Wow.
What's your relationship like now with your 7-year-old son?
That's a good question that I will let him answer when he's 18.
Wow.
Okay.
I keep my son's life private.
But you
which
do
is
have
very
a
important to me.
relationship.
You can ask him when he's 18. I mean that. I think like my son's life is it's very important to me to keep that private, as much as my life isn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, when you came out to your family, what was their reaction?
I only came out to my dad, and I had a 2-hour conversation, which was the epilogue of the book, which didn't go as much as I was hoping. I did manage to push him to an extreme where he agreed that trans people exist, which is far from a given from an ultra-Orthodox Hasidic rabbi who pretty much works for something called a modesty squad. That's a real thing. And he is not someone who is open to the world. And then he was saying, yes, it's possible, but there's no way for you to know. Then I'm telling him, I think 2 therapists and a doctor are good enough. He was like, no, you need a very holy person, which was his way of telling me, there's nothing you can tell me, which is also what taught me a lot about, I think, bigotry and transphobia in so-called religious communities, where I realized it's usually not religion, and it's not God, it's people, and it's the culture, which is what it was a big deal for my dad.
So you were the 6th of 13 children. Your family raised you as the eldest boy in the family.
Yeah.
What about your family, your siblings, your friends?
I'm in touch with some of my siblings, 2 of them out of 12, which doesn't sound like a lot, but most people my age only have 2 siblings. And I'm in touch with 10 to 15 of my first cousins, again, out of a few hundred first cousins.
Wow.
But most people my age don't have more than that, so I focus on the positive part. The community, everyone stopped talking to me when I left, which was in 2012, before I even came out. And to be honest, I don't miss them.
I was going to ask you, is there anything about it that you miss? The
family, yes. Community, not really. I have so many friends, maybe too many to keep up with.
Yeah.
I'm fine. I'm not worried about them.
Wow.
Do you still practice Judaism?
In some ways, yes. I like to say I don't observe, I celebrate in a very strong way. I've done, over the past 3.5 years, probably 300, probably 400 by now, I lost track of public speeches, and more than half of them have been for Jewish communities.
Wow.
I'm very engaged, specifically in New York, with the Jewish activist crowd, which has been really growing really fast, really strongly. I've been involved a lot with the organizing with a group, Never Again Action, which has been organizing about ICE, and I am very politically involved. I know the book isn't political, but I am very politically involved.
Abby, what would you say to somebody who is in your position, whether it's, say, in an ultra-Orthodox situation or a very conservative religion, and they're struggling right now?
You're not alone. It's the single most important thing. Whenever I think if someone could go back and I could tell one thing to my 9-year-old, 12-year-old self, is know that you're not alone. And when I started out, one of my first kind of missions when I was starting on my activism, and I had someone asking me, what is your tangible goal? What is going to be a first thing that you can actually touch on? Because if you're an activist and you don't have a tangible goal, you're going to get exhausted really fast. So I said, I want the Hasidic community to become transphobic, which sounds weird to say that I want them to be that, but that would mean that they would recognize that we exist, which is extremely important. And I can say 3.5 years later, mission accomplished. The Hasidic community is officially transphobic, which didn't exist growing up, but at least now they talk about it, which is very important to me.
Abby Stein, thank you for coming.
Thank
Again,
you.
Abby's memoir is called Becoming Eve, My Journey from Ultra-Orthodox Rabbi to Transgender Woman. You can find more about it on today.com/shop.
Well, thank you for showing that video, David. I thought that really kind of pulls things together. And I want to finish this review with something in the acknowledgments. And I think you can see how I've tried to pull this together. For the most personal parts of my life, despite everything that she's been through, I want to thank my family. I know many of them will never read these words, that my feelings of love are not fully reciprocated. However, as the dedicated pages of this book indicates, and this gets back to her original acknowledgement in the beginning, mighty waters cannot quench love. Thank you to Mommy and Tati, that's her father, who gave me life, showed me what a loving family could look like. I love both of you forever, even from afar. She talks about her 12 siblings, okay, of which, she has a relationship with 2 and all of their children. Regardless of how you might feel about me today, I learned so much from all of you. I love you all. And then at the end, to my love of my life, my child David. Thank you for showing me how much love a person can have for another, for being the ray of light in my darkest days, for being the most essential part of my life. Forever and ever, you are with me, and I am with you. So with that, David will show the last slide. We have I'd love to hear in the few moments we have, if anybody has any particular comments about this book. I found this to be a beautifully written and honest book. I think the interview, helped put all this together, but there's some beautiful passages in this book that are really worth looking at. So any questions or comments?
Well, I felt that this book opened up a whole new world to me, because of course I knew about Hasidic Jews, but I didn't really know how they lived. And it just boggles the mind that they live in this insular community. They don't even speak English. And it's like, a country within a country. And I know we have other religious groups or any kind of groups that are like that. But it was absolutely fascinating to me and a little scary too.
Well, I think that, there's a serial that you can get live stream called Unorthodox that kind of goes through a lot of how hard it was to leave the community. But this is the first one that I know of that talks about being transgender. I mean, we've had, was it Leah Laxusen that wrote the book about how she came out from her Hasidic community, or I guess he was Lubavitch actually, community as a gay woman. But this is the first book of its kind that really talks about transgender. So it really breaks, I think, a lot of barriers.
I was so fascinated I really wanted to know what happened to her. Even emotionally after she came out, but also physically, but I'm sure that's too private for her to.
Well, there are some things that she will not reveal. You heard about, she won't talk about her son.
Right.
She won't talk about whether or not she's had a sex change operation.
Right,
There are certain
right.
things that she's very private about, and there's other things that she's very open about. So you have to respect her boundaries.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
I want to thank you, Ed. This was wonderful. And I want to say, I felt I had never really understood transgender from the inside, how a person really feels. And this book just nailed it. It just nailed on exactly how you would feel stuck and nobody understanding. Yeah, I thought it was an excellent book, and you did a wonderful job.
Oh, you're very kind. I mean, you could just see how she keeps vacillating, you know, back and forth. And again, that passage when she held her son for the first time, you know, if you're really reading it, a tear kind of comes up in your eyes. It was such a beautiful passage.
I want to say something. This community feels that this is the best way to live, that if you join them, you're going to have a wonderful life. So anything out of their ordinary and that's when they hide it. And that's when they don't have anything to do with her, because they don't want the children to know that they have someone that's different. They want to make it like the greatest life, and it is a good life. I'm not against that, but that's why they have so many secrets, and that's why they don't have connections with people that stray, which you see in the book.
I thought it was remarkable, despite the fact that her parents will not speak with her and 10 of her siblings won't. Some of the things she said at the end about how important it was to have that family and support from her parents when she grew up, despite now being estranged.
I was raised Orthodox and kosher and all that. And my father had 21 first cousins, and one of his uncles and two of his first cousins were rabbis. His grandfather was a renowned rabbi in Galveston and in Houston. Anyway, so one of the cousins that became a rabbi went to Portland and was conservative. One went to Connecticut and was Hasidic and married a Hasidic woman, and he had a bunch of children. And then most of them are in Israel, and they each have 10 or 12 children themselves. Well, I had never met them. I'd communicated with them on Ancestry.com. But we've been having a cousins club on Zoom, which, by the way, is fun. And I have this book that my cousin wrote. He's the head of it's the family of our history and of our grandparents. And he is the head of a yeshiva with 1,000 people in it. So he came over here soliciting money for the yeshiva, you know, kind of like that TV show Shtizzle. And he's about my age. And I said, and he claims in here that we have an illustrious heritage, and that our great grandfather was from this very famous rabbi who was the chief rabbi of Prague and the chief rabbi of Lodz and this and that. And I said, so I guess you do a lot of genealogy because y'all can read the original documents in German, Yiddish, and Hebrew over there in Israel. He said, no, we don't do genealogy. Our great grandfather told my father all of this, and we believe him because he was a virtuous man. Okay, so there's no genealogy. So I said, well, do you study history? He said, no. And he said, all we study is the Torah. But he grew up in Connecticut.
Wait, Sharon.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, but we are very time limited. Thank you for telling us about your family. And I think
I just thought it was interesting that they don't do genealogy.
But we are time limited.
Sorry.
And no, don't be sorry. Just wanted to thank every one of you for attending, and thank Ed. I'm not prejudiced, but it was wonderful presentation. So long. I hope that you will come to the next book review in whatever format it will be. And as I said, I've thoroughly loved doing this oversight for many years. Diane will be fabulous.
A big hand to my wife. For how many years have you done this?
7.
7.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good evening. Early Shabbat Shalom. Thanks for spending time with me this evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ed. It was wonderful. It was a
Thank you
fabulous
very much.
presentation.
Thank you.
Yes,
Bye-bye,
the
everybody.
first, and it was wonderful.